ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
Hi, Danielle O'Neill here, and I want to share the latest season of the Expanse podcast with you, Uncropped. Join me as I look at a wild but little-known story from Australia. The sugarcane farm in far north Queensland that inspired an international crop circle hoax. Search for Expanse on the ABC Listen app.
You may have noticed there's been a flurry of activity in Canberra as the government rushes to get a huge amount of legislation through the Parliament before it rises at the end of the week. So, what are the new laws and would they really help you? Today, the ABC's national political lead, David Speers, on the bill's passing and failing as the government ponders a sooner rather than later election. I'm Sam Hawley on Gadigal land in Sydney. This is ABC News Daily. Speersy, you've got to tell me, why is it in the last week of Parliament for the year, there's always this sort of mad rush? It's like the school kids or the uni students, right, where you leave everything to the last minute and then you've got to stay up all night to get it done.
That's exactly what I did. And look, a bit like that, I think there'll be a few very late nights here in Canberra this week too, as they try to get it all done. Look, why does this happen so often? I guess it's because negotiations can drag on and on, because each party, each side, be it Labor, Coalition, Greens, even crossbenchers, they want to squeeze something out of it that they can show to the electorate they've got to win. So it drags out negotiations forever and ever. Ultimately, you need a deadline for a decision to be made, for everyone to put up, shut up, vote for it, vote against it, fold, whatever they're going to do. You need a deadline, and that's what this week is. It's the end of the parliamentary year and potentially the end of the parliamentary term, which we can come to. What that means is everyone knows they've got to make a call one way or another this year. So, but I've got to say, it does feel like this year a whole lot has particularly been crammed into this last week. It's dozens and dozens of bills. Some are going to get up, some are going to fail. Some the government knows will fail, but still wants to prove a point by having a vote on. So, yeah, a lot going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And, of course, the election is coming. Yes. It could be quite soon in the new year. We don't know yet, of course. But, yeah, there's a sort of sense of the government clearing the decks.
Yes, there is. So the election's due by May, can obviously be held before then. We know it won't be held this year, but the question is, will the Prime Minister at the end of January call an election for probably early March, or will he wait until April or May and leave it a bit longer? Now, the benefit of going in March would mean you'd miss having to hand down a budget, which is currently slated for the 25th of March, and that might have some ugly numbers in it, so they might want to avoid that. Yeah. The benefit of waiting might be you get an interest rate cut, and we know the government would dearly love one of those. So I doubt the PM's genuinely made a final decision on this. He's no doubt weighing things up, but everyone's treating this week of Parliament as though it's the last one before the election, because it could well be.
Yeah, I feel like we just had an election. Oh, yeah, no, that was 3 years ago. Oh, anyway.
And there's been a few since then too, right?
They come along pretty quickly, don't they? All right, so let's look at this legislation then, just to explain to people what's going on. As you said, the government struggles to get some through, it's fine with others. So let's just look at where it's succeeded, first of all. Now, a big one is housing. Yes. Just tell me about this, because for years the government's really struggled to get its plans on housing through the Parliament. The Greens were standing in the way, but all of a sudden they've just stepped aside and said, OK, you can have it.
They folded on the first day of this week, on the Monday. Look, with housing, there's a whole lot of things the government is doing. There's no one silver bullet, but we've been talking here about two bills in particular that have dragged on for months and months. One is called the Help to Buy program that would give 10,000 families or individuals each year a chance to buy a house they otherwise wouldn't be able to do that. The government goes in as a joint equity partner, would take up to 40% of the purchase price and own 40% of the equity in the house until it's sold. The other one is build to rent. That's a tax break for big investors who are developers. They get the tax break if they make apartments available below the market rental rate. So again, helps those struggling to find a rental. Now, the Greens wanted to attach a whole bunch of other things, curbing negative gearing, capital gains tax breaks and so on. This week they dropped that. They played a pretty hard line on this. The government was making it clear they weren't budging. They were prepared to see these voted down and then campaign against the Greens and the coalition, who aren't backing these either. And so, the Greens folded, said they tried as hard as they could, but they're backing those through. And as we speak, they're meant to be going through. So by the time you listen to this, they probably have gone through.
Yes, yeah. Okay, so that's a big win for the government. And, of course, housing is such a massive issue.
Look, they'll need to do more than this.
Yeah.
I suspect coming up to the election they'll have more to say. But these are just two elements of the various things they've been doing on housing.
Yeah. So the government has also had a win when it comes to social media and having this ban put in place for children aged under 16, which I think, I don't know about you, Spearsy, but, hooray, all the parents go.
I suspect that's right. And I think this is the one piece of legislation that's probably going to have the most attention and has had the most attention leading up to this chaotic final week of Parliament, because it's the one thing that parents, kids, everyone is aware of as a big social issue and many would agree social problem. Now, there is strong support, obviously, for this banning kids up to the age of 16. However, there are a lot of concerns around technically how workable is it, what's the technology that will be used, will ID have to be collected by all of us who want to use social media to prove that we're not underage and all. So, look, a lot of detail is still unclear. And boy, even if you like this idea, the way it's being done is an almighty rush. They've had I think it was less than one day. I think it might have been a matter of hours, the inquiry they held into this. And even supporters of it would acknowledge that this has been a pretty rushed process. Still, it's going to go through because the coalition support it. Peter Dutton was calling for this before Anthony Albanese. So look, that is clearly a political win for the Prime Minister. He can say to parents who are really worried about what's happening online that he's doing something big. It's world leading. No other country's done this. So he'll chalk that up as a win.
This is an issue that governments around the world are grappling with. And can I say, when I was talking with leaders, they are all looking at what we are doing and they are applauding what we are doing in showing leadership in this area.
Now, another controversial piece of legislation that has won the support of the opposition is changing election donation laws. So just tell me about that and why we care about that.
Yeah, again, this was talked about basically since the last election. Labor wanted to do a few things. The crossbench were worried about this and feared that a last-minute deal in the dying days of the parliamentary term would be done between the two major parties to hurt the minor parties and the independents. And lo and behold, here we are in the dying days of the parliamentary term and the two majors have done a deal. So look, this caps donations at $20,000 per donor, $800,000 per seat. Wow. They can spend $90 million per party. So the Teal independents are aggrieved. Clive Palmer too. It's really aimed at stopping Clive Palmer spending the squillions that he has been spending. And look, there'll be argument around whether this favours the majors and so on. One good thing it clearly does is improve transparency so we can see far more quickly who's donating, how much, because that at the moment is painfully slow in finding out where the money's going. And money does matter in politics.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, my gosh. And look, you were just in the US. Look at the money they... Oh, my God.
And we don't want to end up like that, with the crazy money that's spent there.
Oh, absolutely incredible. Okay. All right. So that's some of the successes that Labor has had. It's also made a big change to how much people pay for aged care, which is really good as well. Yeah,
and this is worth just noting because I think, while I said social media will have most attention, the aged care one's probably the most significant reform, I've got to say. We've known for years, Sam, that the system's not working. And then we're headed on this trajectory where it's going to get worse and worse. Ageing population, standards are terrible in a lot of the aged care sector. What this finally does is say, okay, we need a lot more money going in And that is going to mean people who can afford to pay a bit more are going to have to pay a bit more. Those who can't won't. A lot more in-home care packages, which is great. Better standards that providers will have to meet. So this is significant. The reason it's probably not getting as much attention this week is because the deal was broadly done months ago between the two sides, and it needed to be bipartisan. Would have been very easy to run a scare campaign that, grandma's going to have to pay more.
Yeah.
But with both major parties on board, this takes the politics out, and it is a significant reform.
Yeah, okay. All right. So there's some of the government's successes.
Yeah.
So now let's have a look where it's really struggling, Spearsy, including, this was an interesting one. It wanted to, of course, reduce the number of international students studying here in universities. I thought the coalition really liked the idea of that, but then it blocked it.
This is a real head-scratcher, and the only reasonable reason most can come up with is that this is politics at play, because you're right, Peter Dutton's made a big deal and will make a big deal leading up to the election about immigration being out of control, that he's going to go a lot harder in reining it in, and foreign students in particular, a big element of that. He's talked about, overstayers, students who overstay their visas, likening them to modern-day boat people. So you can see that he's talking tough on this. This bill would allow the minister of the day, right, be it Labor or Liberal, to set caps on how many foreign students universities and other providers can bring in. So if they're unhappy with the caps that the current government set, well, if they win the election, they can, change the numbers and go harder. But no, they've decided to vote against this. It appears as though this is mainly about keeping the government under pressure on immigration, not even giving them a win at all, so that they can, come election time, point to the fact that the numbers are still too high.
All right, yep, so that's a real political move by the sound of it. All right, so the government also has run into trouble with a bill that's supposed to target misinformation online, and that all got a bit chaotic by the look of it.
Yeah, this has been a mess really since the start, this one. You're right, it's about mis and disinformation online, but no one really wants governments deciding what's true and false and what's a lie online. So it was a bill that would have given the social media platforms the responsibility to set their own rules. And if they weren't sticking to those rules, then ACMA, the regulator, could come in with some hefty fines. There were a few areas of serious harm where ACMA could take some direct action, also dealing with bots spreading lies and misinformation. But look, the concerns for the coalition were that this was too much censorship of the internet. The concerns for the Greens was that it wasn't enough government control over misinformation, so they ended up with no friends. No one on the crossbench backed it either. So they've pulled it all together. They won't put it to a vote, and you won't hear much more about this between now and the end of the parliamentary term.
Yeah, it's also the government decided to delay legislating restrictions on gambling advertising, and that's really annoyed a fair few people, actually, who are pretty worried about this space.
And this is curious too, because there should be some measure of bipartisanship around this. We know Peter Dutton in his budget reply early on made it clear he wanted to do something about gambling ads around live sport. Now, exactly what the government is proposing to do, it still hasn't said, but no legislation this year, and they say they'll keep working on this and maybe we'll see something in the new year, but if Parliament's not back, nothing's going to happen before the election. So yes, a lot of concern. Don't forget there was that unanimous bipartisan parliamentary report chaired by the Labor MP Peter Murphy, which called for a complete ban on gambling ads, pointed out all the reasons why, but no movement on this this year.
Yeah, all right, so they've parked that for the moment. Yeah. Okay, all right, as we mentioned, of course, the election is just around the corner once again. So what do you think, in all of this legislation, is there anything that will actually sway voters when it comes to voting time? Because we know, Spearsy, really the biggest issue for Australians right now is the cost of living, making ends meet.
Yeah, and look, there are things happening this week that we'll get through that people will notice in their lives. Obviously, if kids are banned from social media, families will notice that. Another bill that we didn't mention, the HEX indexation. This is a change to lower the indexation rate. People would notice that. Changes on aged care. If anyone's got a family member in aged care, they'll notice those changes over time as well. But look, you're right. Cost of living is by far and away the biggest voter concern. Daylight second. And not a lot this week is very heavily focused on that. I think, the government would point to things that it's previously done, stage 3 tax cut changes and so on. It'll need to do more, though. The energy bill relief presumably gets extended sometime before the election. It'll have more to say on this over the summer and leading up to the election, whenever that is, because that is absolutely the one thing that's going to decide this election.
David Speers is the ABC's national political lead and host of Insiders. This episode was produced by Sydney Peed, Cara Jensen-McKinnon and Anna John. Audio production by Sam Dunn. Our supervising producer is David Cody. I'm Sam Hawley. ABC News Daily will be back again tomorrow. Thanks for listening.